that is probably the ugliest stadium I've ever been in.
Yep.
I love
If
that.
you don't think the rivalry matters,
that
right there is point enough. The shade just doesn't stop.
Welcome to the Rivalry Podcast. Jace, JP,
What up?
Michigan, Ohio State, the greatest rivalry in all of sports. Your garbage-free college football podcast focused on the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry from River Radio Ministries and presented by our friends at Elevated Integrity Construction. This is the first off-season episode that we've done so far. It's been about 6 weeks or so since the season ended, and we're about a month out from spring football.
And we have some new hardware in the studio today.
Let's talk about that. If you're watching on YouTube right now at Rival Pod, across social media, by the way.
I found myself a nice little championship trophy.
I do see that. That is front and center here for us.
I didn't even think about this. I'm a little disappointed, but I saw somebody, Juck on Buck. If you're on Twitter, you probably are familiar with him. He actually posted this, that he had found one right after the title game, and I thought, that's genius. Of course somebody 3D prints these things. I found one. It was like 20, 35, or no, it wasn't even $35, like $30.
Oh, it's basically free.
To have somebody,
you're saving money.
Guy math. So I got it shipped to my house, and I almost broke it day one. So
I'm kind of regretting now that I feel like I should have done that after Michigan's, because now we just have one represented here.
And my wife is not pleased because I saw that this is an opportunity, and so I told her, like, I'm getting one for every single trophy we win from here on out.
Oh, good.
Anything.
Good.
And so
that's good. Yeah, I wonder why she's not super pumped about that.
She knew, because I'm a collector. It's my worst habit, actually.
What we need now is we need like shelves behind you where we can like start to like stack like an actual trophy case for our teams.
It started with those dumb Funko Pops, and she saw me latch onto something else, and she thought, "Dear Lord Jesus, no, not another one."
The real rivalry is between Laurel and your collection of random junk. That's what this is.
Absolutely.
Hey, by the way, if you are not subscribed to the podcast already, wherever you're listening right now, go ahead and do that. If you're not following on social media, again, the handle at RivalPod and RivalPod.com. Handful of different things to go through this week, because again, we our last episode was right after the Natty, and so there's been a lot of moving pieces. There's 1,000 places we could take this. I think the first and foremost, we're recording this on a Monday morning, March 3rd, and so the last week to 10 days, this feels like a good place to start, has really been kind of rivalry week for all of the other programs around Michigan, Ohio State. Michigan basketball came into Columbus about 10 days or so ago and beat the Buckeyes in Columbus by 3. I feel like I've seen that score line, a 3-point win in Columbus again. Too. It was wild. And you could tell, this is why it's the greatest rivalry in sports, right? You can tell the intensity is there from the jump.
And I think there's like a weird misconception that like the rivalry only exists in football. It sure don't, because that place, the Schottenstein Center, does not get packed often for basketball games nowadays. And it was pretty well attended.
Ohio State's having a middling season. They are probably not making the NCAA tournament, but for that game,
they were there, and that team showed up, and it was competitive. It was tough. Came right down to the wire. I mean, it was what you expect a rivalry game to be.
So you have that, and then more recent memory, even though that wasn't all that long ago. More recently, Michigan Ohio State hockey played a pretty pivotal series for Big Ten standings.
Both are good teams this year.
Both are slated at the moment, and if you're into college hockey, this will mean something. If it doesn't, that's okay. But both are making the tournament according to the pairwise rankings right now, so that's a good thing. I grew up on college hockey, was my first love, and so I'm a big college hockey guy. So what a fun series! Ohio State wins the first game in overtime. Michigan beats them, tries to blow a lead, but beats them in Columbus on Friday. And again, the place is packed out. One, because these are both really good college hockey teams, but two, exactly to your point, because it's the game. It's their versions of the game, right? Like, this doesn't happen across the board. Okay. Like, I get Duke and North Carolina is a big basketball rivalry, but it doesn't translate the same onto the football field, you know?
They just
it's still a rivalry, but it doesn't translate that way. This is an entirely unique thing. Like, what Michigan and Ohio State do when they play is entirely unique. And again, the fact that those teams are so evenly matched and they split, they're both likely to make the NCAA tournament. They're both hosting a home playoff series this weekend for the Big Ten. I mean, it's good stuff. And then on Saturday, you had the Stadium Series at the Shoe, where now we've got the professionals involved and it's the Red Wings and the Blue Jackets.
And you would think that it would be mostly about the Blue Jackets and the Red Wings, but it wasn't. 99% of it was them talking about how many Michigan players were on the ice skating and playing in Ohio Stadium. And it was all about the Wolverines and the Buckeyes, even then. And these guys don't really have any real connection to that. I mean, like Adam Fantilli for the Blue Jackets, a Michigan guy. Sure, and there's some other players that had played for the Wolverines.
Zach Werenski plays for the Jackets. Is Kent Johnson still on? I know you're not as big of a hockey guy, but I think Kent Johnson is still on the team. I believe he's a Michigan guy. Dylan Larkin for the Red Wings is a big Michigan guy. And that just adds to it. And even if you watch the broadcast during the game, they're talking to Kirk Herbstreit.
Yeah.
Peter's there. They're talking to Sonny Styles. Yeah. They're crowd surfing, what's his face?
Who
Marty
died or whatever, apparently.
At some point,
I just saw him get carried out of there like an angel and then dropped. And I'm like, all right.
But that's what makes what this rivalry is. Like, that's what it's like, well, why do a podcast about this whole thing? Because it bleeds into every sport. It bleeds into every aspect. And of course, wouldn't you know it, the Blue Jackets get a big win over Detroit. And of course, the Detroit fans like myself are looking at controversial penalty that leads to the game-winning goal, going, well, of course we got hosed in the shoe. We've seen this movie before. It's such a fun thing. One of the things that I really enjoyed, though, is that they were talking to Dylan Larkin. He's if you're not a hockey guy, that's okay. But Detroit Red Wings captain Dylan Larkin played for Michigan. One of his best friends, Zach Werenski, playing for the Jackets. Larkin will be in Werenski's wedding later this year. And they were asking Larkin, like, hey, like, what's this outdoor experience like? And he said, that is probably the ugliest stadium I've ever been in.
Yep.
I love
if you don't think the rivalry matters,
that
right there is point enough. The shade just doesn't stop.
We say there's no off season for the rivalry, which is why we don't, is why we don't just take a break for 6 months and jump back in August, right? Yeah. Because there's always stuff going on. Speaking of stuff going on, the combine, NFL combine's going on right now, or just wrapped up rather.
Yeah.
I didn't watch a ton of this, but I saw there were some real interesting storylines out of this because everyone wants to see how are my team's top players going to perform? Yeah. And there's always like extra storylines running back and forth in this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's my favorite part of the combine because I'm not one of those like deep analytical guys that's going to go and be like, well, let's see what kind of 40 he run. Like
we've said for years, fine. You want that stuff. Yeah. There are other podcasts that's called ESPN.
Look, guy ran fast, great. Travion Henderson, I know ran a really good 40.
Man run fast with ball.
Great. He also catch ball. Cool. That's nice. I love the weird interview stuff that happens throughout these weeks. And there's some cool stories, some little clips, because all of these guys are being interviewed. You saw, there's just so many. I don't even know which one I want to go off. You know what? I do know which one I want to go off on first.
He does know.
Kyle McCord, because I want to revisit.
It's 2025 and we're still talking about Kyle McCord.
Because I hate the cowardice that is Kyle McCord, because he goes in there, and after the Michigan loss, the reporters are all around because they just had a huge upset against Miami, and they won. Ohio State lost, and they get interviewed, and they go, what does it feel like? I forget the exact question, but along the lines of like, how good does it feel to know that you guys just got a huge upset and Ohio State just lost to Michigan? And he goes, everything comes full circle. And then at the combine, he's being asked a question about how does it feel seeing on Ohio State team go and win the Natty? And he goes, it's really great to see those guys. I still really support and root for those guys. It's just really cool to see. I was rooting for them. No, you weren't, Kyle. Stop. The good guy routine flew out the window. Nobody dislikes you in Ohio State. We're fine. We know what we got. We got the better end of the deal. We got the better quarterback. You got to go and be in a scenario where you got less attention on you, and you got to just go and ball out, and you did. And you played well. You'll be a fine quarterback on the bench for some random team for the next 5 to 6 years, and then you'll be done in the Canada League somewhere, and that's great for you. But Will Howard was the better person at the time. He will always have been the better choice. And I just hate the backtracking of everything comes full circle, and then they go out and they win. Do you feel upset
about this?
Yes, it just bugs me. It's not even that. It's just man up. If you're going to have an attitude the one way, keep it 100, keep it a buck, and say the same thing and go, I'm proud for my friends that are still on that team. Next question. And move on. But to act like he's sitting there in some Ohio State 6 Kyle McCord jersey that he got from Meyer on the buyout market, and then acting like he was still rooting. It's just false. You know, Kyle McCord wanted them to fail. They asked him questions about him and Ryan Day, and he said something about, I think people think that him and I have a bad relationship. No, I don't think you talked after you left. And I think everybody expected that and knew that, and that's fine. You don't have to be buddy-buddy with him. It drove me up a wall when he was all of a sudden trying to act like he was still an Ohio State supporter, when every chance he had during the season, he dunked on him. Every chance he had.
I think Will Howard just overthrew another receiver at the combine while you were going on that rant there.
Zero shade from national championship caliber Will Howard here.
If you didn't beat Michigan, then I get to say my stuff too. That's how this works, because again, like we said last episode, none of your friends who like other teams can have any fun whatsoever.
Do you have a combine story? Because I have a handful.
So I'm like you. The combine doesn't what I'll do is I'll watch like the first round of the draft, because I think that's interesting. I don't get into the combine stuff. I'll see some. The one thing that I saw was that Donovan Edwards, I guess, like had the most bench press reps of any running back at the combine, which is cool. My brother-in-law sent that to me, and I texted him back. I said, "That's really awesome. He can't find a gap in the offensive line to run the football anymore, but at least he can bench." Which is exactly where he'll be, unfortunately.
That's fine.
I know, like genuinely though, like I genuinely, and I said this throughout the last year of the podcast, I won't rehash that. Like, I love Dono. I hope he does well. He was an integral part of that national championship team. He put in really 3 really great years. This last year wasn't that great. Yeah. I get that. This last year wasn't that great. So I hope he does well. He made big plays and big moments for Michigan, even in 23, which wasn't as good of a season for him.
Yeah.
Obviously was hugely instrumental in the national championship. So I hope he does well. But yeah, all good-natured fun there.
There were some other stories that I saw during the combine. I think it was Tez Johnson from Oregon was being interviewed at the podium, and he was asked specifically about the Ohio State game. And he was, and this is going to sound like I'm salty, but I just think some of these comments are just outrageous to say when we know the facts. And so Tez Johnson gets up there, and they're asking about the game, and he goes, yeah, in game 1, I think Ohio State just tried to beat us skill for skill, and we saw how that went. And then the next game, they came out, and I think they thought, well, we can't hang with these guys skill for skill, and so we're just going to have to game plan, and we're going to leave some room off of them, and then we'll play up. And I'm like, bro, you got smacked. It was like 34-0 in the second game.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Skill for skill does not matter. We didn't lose game 1 because of skill for skill.
Those two teams, and I can say this because I don't have a dog in that fight, like those two teams are neck and neck skill for skill.
Yeah, but he was acting like Ohio State couldn't compete with them skill for skill. And I'm like, my brother in Christ, you were down 34-0.
Was Tez wasn't the one that spit on the guy, right?
No,
that was the other guy. I can't remember his name right now.
It was just a salty comment. And then he said something along the lines that was just a cocky statement of, and I like Tez Johnson. I think he's a great receiver. But he came out and he said something like, well, yeah, they should have won the championship. If you beat us last year, you'd better have gone on to win it all. And I'm like,
I mean, he's not incorrect.
Like it's not
incorrect.
It's one of those things that, like, the way they lost and the way they performed, I just don't want you to just don't say stuff like that.
Yeah, but couldn't you say the same thing about a lot of the Ohio State stuff after after the Michigan loss and post Tennessee, where guys are saying, so it's like, my guy, like, simmer down.
Like what though?
The Jack Sawyer on the sideline, but like, yeah, we here, but like mid game when the camera's on him,
talking about Tennessee game.
You know what I'm talking about? Like where he's like talking about, like, they thought we weren't going to be here, but here we are. It's like, my guy, settle down.
That's different. How
is that different?
Because they still had games to play and they could still continue to solidify that. For Tez Johnson, you guys had your chance and you got smoked.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think that makes no sense.
Had Ohio State gone out and lost against Texas and then came back and said, yeah, I feel like we were still the better team. Well, you weren't. Then I would have had an issue.
Yeah. I'll buy that.
My other thing was, I want to say it was a Tennessee player, and I don't remember his name, but he was on the podium and he was being talked about Ohio State, and he gave a lot of credit. They said, like, who was the most impressive Ohio State player that you had to go against? And he said something like, the entire team. He said, you saw how it went. We thought we were going to go in there and be able to play better, and their game plan just was way better than ours. But then he just made a comment that just, I just don't believe, you know, when like they still try to have a little bit of like that cockiness to them. And he gets up there and he says, yeah, they got that one young wide receiver. I can't remember his name. Sir, you know who Jeremiah Smith is. He scored 2 tutties on you.
I dig it. I dig it.
I hate it. I hate the level. Just
the man's going to the league. Let him be.
You don't have to sit there and be like, he's the greatest guy I've ever seen. But to act like the best wide receiver that played in the nation this past season is a name you're just not familiar with, when he absolutely crisped your defense all night.
The way
is not the way to do it.
The way they got beat, I don't.
Yeah,
I dig it, but also
like, it's funny and it gives you something to talk about. But at the same time, I'm sitting there like, ask anybody in your family who number 4 for Ohio State is, and they're going to say that. I couldn't even remember your name right now to reference who it was making the quote.
Yikes.
That's all I'm saying. My last funny story actually involves Will Howard, because with all the stuff going on all throughout the combine, and this is the stuff that I like nerd out over, are all these little quotes and all these things. Apparently, it was on the Pat McAfee show, and he was talking about how all these people are downtown Indianapolis. They're networking. They're hanging out. All these scouts and all these people covering teams are there, ready to report. And they see this guy in a parking lot just throwing a ball to somebody. And they're like, oh, well, it's probably some Joe Schmo guy that like just wants to.
He's just real pumped about the combine.
He said he wants to Uncle Rico it from Napoleon Dynamite. Like he's just there trying to throw it over a mountain just to see if he can get any eyes on him to get a shot. And it turns out to be none other than William Howard sitting in a parking garage, throwing the ball. I don't remember if they said who he was throwing the ball to, but he was just getting a couple of reps in, just trying to hang out. And I just love stuff like that, because I think, didn't McCarthy and Corum do this in the hallway of like the hotel lobby or something?
Yeah.
Where there's like a video of them throwing passes together.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what event that was. That might have been before the Big Ten championship.
I'm just sitting here trying to eat a free continental breakfast while JJ McCarthy's throwing back shoulder fades to Blake Corum.
It's like, hey, you guys know we're out of scrambled eggs, and McCarthy's just dropping back and scrambling for pressure.
It's like you're living inside of an ESPN commercial. I love it.
I love that so much. To be fair to Will, though, he hasn't been to Indy, so he probably wanted to spend a little extra time there.
You know what? He's going to be having a great, successful NFL career for my Cleveland Browns, and I hope that we can clip that.
Ain't nobody drafting Will Howard.
I would absolutely. Oh, I would die on the hill.
Listen, if we're talking about quarterbacks riding the bench in the NFL, I would. Will Howard and Kyle McCord can be sitting next to each other somewhere.
I would die on the hill that William Howard will be a better quarterback than Kyle McCord in the NFL. He might be,
but I'm just saying, like, he ain't getting playing time. He's not. He
I
ain't
have strong opinions on that.
Save that for a different podcast. Why don't you? Hey, maybe you do feel a little bit like Tennessee, and you know what you're doing isn't working, and you need to transfer in a little bit of help. Thankfully, our friends at Elevated Integrity Construction are the portal to a successful project. Even in the offseason, we got to give a little bit of love to Elevated, because they've been sponsoring this thing for forever. Fantastic people. The folks with integrity in their name. If you've got a church, home, or business build, go with them. They've been doing it a long time. Aaron, we appreciate you. ElevatedIntegrity.com. If you are not listening to the Rivalry podcast on the Varsity Network app, what are you doing with your life? Because we are proud to be part of the Varsity Network, powered by Learfield, which is a must-have for every college football fan. Live games and podcasts just like this one, free to download in whatever app store you've got. So be sure to search for the Rivalry podcast in the Varsity Network app, and be sure to download that today. You can also support the podcast. We rely on support from sponsors, and we rely on friends like our good buddy Patrick.
Yeah, shout out Patrick.
Patrick King, thank you for your support of the podcast. Patrick did that at rivalpod.com. Clicked on the Buy Me a Buckeye link. It's on the support tab. You can be just like Patrick, get a little shout out in an episode, and support the pod this year, whether through the Buy Me a Buckeye, which is basically, if you're not familiar, it's basically just like, hey, it's a monthly subscription thing or a one-off thing that you can support. You can buy yourself a t-shirt. We've got those for sale as well. I'm wearing it right now. And so thanks for doing that, Patrick. You can join him right now. The website again, rivalpod.com. One of the things that I want to just kind of pick your brain on here is there's been a lot of conversation around spring games and what that's going to look like. Like, actually what it's going to look like. So Matt Rule at Nebraska is kind of the first one to come out and say, hey, we're not doing a spring game this year. And his reasoning is that in the NIL era, he doesn't want to put a ton of players on film that people can identify and go, hey, how about that kid? I wonder how much we could get him for.
Yeah.
That's legit his concern. On the Ohio State side, Ryan Day has said, or Ohio State has said that they will be doing what they're calling a spring showcase, which for all intents and purposes sounds like it will not be a traditional spring game. Ryan even said, yeah, I'm not really sure what that's going to look like yet. Well, my dude, it's spring, so maybe figure that out. And then Michigan is going to be doing the more traditional spring game, the Maize v Blue that they've done every year for forever. So I have strong thoughts on this, but I'm curious, like, what's your perspective either about Ohio State particularly, or just like the landscape of college football, removing something like a spring game entirely, or turning it into almost what sounds like almost a skills competition thing?
Yeah, I understand both sides of it. I think for me, as just a pure fan, I don't want them to ever get rid of it, because this is the stuff I get excited for. It's like it's what I've already kind of turned my mentality to when it comes to the bowl games. Even is I'm no longer looking for like a big victory or anything. I don't want to see the stars. I want to see the stars of tomorrow. I want to see the Tavian St. Clairs. I want to see the James Peoples. I want to see the freshmen and up and coming receivers coming in and see what they can do. I don't need to see a Carnell Tate, a Brandon Ennis. I don't need to see a Jeremiah Smith. I know what those guys can produce. I've seen it. So I'm fine keeping those guys healthy. But I also do understand the fear now from these coaches, like a Matt Rule, where he's going, I know that I've got this stud in James People. And I know I don't want people poaching that. I don't want them to see this 4-star guy. I don't want them to see a Tavian St. Clair or something like that and coming in trying to pry him away because he's in my plans. So I get both sides of it. And do I think they're going to go away from traditional stuff? Yeah, I think you're going to see a majority of teams do what an Ohio State is doing, where it's a glorified showcase of talent. You go in and you get to see them maybe run a 40, almost like a combine or something. They do a couple of throwing drills here and there.
Here's my question on that though, and I've seen a few folks ask this. Does anybody care? Like when we're talking about like, you know, the spring game, like, hey, people showing up and whatever else. And I can't remember. I think Michigan's is free. I don't remember Ohio State's might have a small one, but it's not much. You know, it's a chance for people to go in, be at the shoe, taking the experience. And I think, like, are you going to lose out on that? Because it's like, okay, I'm going to watch some quarterbacks I don't know throw at a target.
I think what
that's not interesting.
I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot less people in the stands, but you're going to see the diehards show up, the nerds like me that want to go and see that. And it's going to become a non-ticketed event. Where like I respect Michigan for going and still playing a game. I thought that was cool last year, being able to go and experience that and it actually be a game. And I like, they do like a draft style thing that I really enjoy too. And so I love how they do it. I don't know if it'll continue going that way for anybody. I think everybody will inevitably change just with the way the NIL is starting to work out. You're seeing guys like a Carnell Tate getting $1.5 million deals to transfer out. He's not, apparently, but you're seeing stuff like that. I mean, that's your third string guy. Yeah. And so you have these guys. I know for Ohio State, a big commit right now is Chris Henry Jr. He's a wide receiver, 5-star guy. A stud. I mean, just talked about as the next up and coming Ohio State great. And if I'm Ohio State, I'm Ryan Day. I'm looking at Tavian St. Clair. I'm looking at him, and I'm going, all right, how can I keep these guys in scarlet and gray? Yeah. And I don't know if I want to put tape if they're going to go out and perform some highlight play in a spring game that ESPN and all these other, the way social media works nowadays, is going to get thrown up all over the place.
I'm gonna take a. I agree, but I'm gonna take a bit of a different stance here, though. Okay. I don't disagree with a single word that you said there, but I think that there's also got to be a reality of, listen, if you've got guys that genuinely don't want to be there, then maybe you don't want them there
for sure.
And so like I'm realizing the older I get how much more of a traditionalist I am with college football, where I don't, NIL's not going anywhere. Okay, I get that. So like trying to keep as much of that traditional college football scene alive matters. That's why, and I saw a bunch of folks talk about this after Michigan went to the Rose Bowl game in 23, or I guess technically 24, you get it. But talking about, the lack of just piped in noise was a big thing. Where it's like just taking the natural atmosphere, the bands, the whatever, got the San Gabriels, whatever. that sort of kind of nostalgic. The spring game, like you're saying, the spring game is in that same vein. I would hate to see teams go the way of Nebraska. I get it.
Yeah.
I absolutely get it. I would hate to see them go that way. And we'll see what Ohio State trots out. That just doesn't seem that interesting. That seems useless to me. And so I would love to see teams, and I hope Michigan never moves away from it, continuing to play a traditional spring game. You mentioned, the draft process. And I'm trying to remember for Michigan, I think the winning team all get steak dinners and stuff. So it's like there's something on the line for it.
Yeah, it's fun.
And as well, listen, we know what Bryce Underwood's going to be, right? But like, you want to go. I don't want him to see him thrown at a coach or thrown at a target or thrown at a net. I want to see Bryce Underwood out there, and what's he gonna do with the football? Because I tell you what, when that kid, whoever ends up being the start, whether it's Mikey Keene, Jaden Davis, Bryce Underwood, whoever, when Bryce steps out on that field to take that first spring game snap, that crowd's going to go nuts.
It's the same thing with Tavian St. Clair.
That's going to be special. And so and if you've got a guy out there, that experiences that and then gets the offer to go play at Kentucky or something because he gets a little more money, genuinely, more power to him. I'm not going to deprive these kids of their money. Go get it. But also, okay, great. I get that it's not that simple, but there's something about college football that's got to be preserved as we move into this lack of amateurism era. We're already beyond the pale there. Keep what you can of that.
And I 100% agree with you. I do think the one thing that has benefited Ohio State on that regards is they, throughout their postseason run, brought their recruits along with them. Their early enrollees. Huge help. Because there's a guy from Mansfield, where I'm from. He's a 4-star receiver recruit. Early enrollee. He was at every single bowl game. He was in the locker room with the team. He was on the sideline. He had a jersey before each game. That is how you help to build that culture.
Yep.
And because that's what's going to keep these guys, because I agree. You don't want a kid there that doesn't want to be there if they can be easily swayed with money, but also it takes a little bit of time for them to kind of build into that. And so you've got to have you've got to have a good culture system there, and you've got to find ways to get them involved and to get them acclimated quick and fast. That's just the nature of the game. And I think the Ohio State championship run really helped them with their early enrollees. You had a handful of really big recruits. Pettyjohn, who's a linebacker recruit, was there that people are really hyping up. The guy I just talked about, Bogpen Miller, he was there. Tavian was there. Carter Lowe, another offensive line recruit. Those guys were at every single game. They were bonding with the team. There's pictures of all of them with upperclassmen, and that stuff's going to help keep guys regardless.
And this goes without saying, right? But like when you're winning, when you are around a team that's winning, and again, Michigan fans don't jump on me because Michigan did the same thing in their championship run, right? Jaden Davis was part of those practices. Okay. And so when you've got these young guys around a team, they get to witness not just the game, but like they get to witness exactly what you're saying. The locker room, the upperclassmen, the coaches, the tradition.
Bryce was with them at Alabama.
They get to see kind of the pageantry of the whole thing. And then you're winning and they're seeing the confetti and let's not forget, number one, like as adults, we're like, this is super cool. These are 18-year-olds. Okay. Like, yeah, they're adults, but like these are fresh out of high school kids that are still able to take that stuff in and go, well, yeah, now you've got that core memory stuff. Why would I transfer and go to LSU when I could stay at Ohio State or I could stay at Michigan and 100%. Win trophies, right? Anyway, I have a few thoughts on that, if you can't tell. The last thing I want to talk about here, and this is really the big one, if you're like, you guys, we started off kind of talking about just a little this and that. Now we're kind of really getting into it. This is, I think, one of the big things I wanted to mention too, is since the national championship, right after, there's been a lot of coordinator movement, especially at Ohio State.
It's the same thing that always happens. Whenever you win, your coaches get poached.
Look what happened to Michigan last year.
Rinse, repeat.
And we'll talk in a second about if this is the same thing or not, because there's some question there. But Jim Knowles, Jim Knowles too, but Chip Kelly is now the offensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders. You've got Matt Patricia now coming in to replace Jim Knowles as defensive coordinator. Offensive coordinator is now going to be Brian Hartline, co-offensive coordinator with,
I forget
another guy.
I want to say it's Keenan Bailey, but I could be wrong on that.
But my Point being, though, like you're exactly right. There's a lot of movement there. And so I don't think that Chip Kelly moving on, I don't know if that's a surprise or not.
It's not a surprise. I think, to me, Chip Kelly was a rental. He was there to basically prove what he's worth as a assistant. There are certain coaches, and I see a lot of people, and this trickles down to the Matt Patricia hire. There are so many people that I think mentally, when a former assistant becomes a head coach in a league and they're not as successful there, people automatically assume they're bad coaches. That's just not the case. You saw it with Chip Kelly. Some coaches aren't great head coaches, but that doesn't make them bad coaches. They can be great assistants. You see that in Chip Kelly. I think that'd be the same way with Jim Knowles. That's how I feel about Matt Patricia. Matt Patricia as an assistant coordinator.
As a Lions fan, I need you to know that there's a lot of PTSD that comes with this hire.
Sure.
Okay,
and I get that, and I know for Eagles fans there was the same thing with Chip Kelly, and you saw, I mean, what Chip Kelly was doing at UCLA was fine, but you saw him really thrive when he's able to focus on just doing one thing. You saw Ryan Day thrive when he was stopped doing numerous things and just focused on one thing and allowed other people who had the experience to handle what they're good at. And so for me, Chip Kelly leaving didn't surprise me at all. I knew the second they won the championship, he was gone. Jim Knowles surprised me.
Well, and I think probably a surprise for a lot of people. Like, obviously he's got ties to PA, but to leave for an interdivisional rival, not the rival, but to leave for a rival, I think it seems to me, as a Michigan man looking in, it seems like it's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Is that just kind of the nature of anytime a guy leaves, you're kind of
I think
grumpy about it, or
it's where you go to? And to me, it wasn't so much surprising that Jim Knowles left. It was where he left to go.
Yeah.
And to me, there were two schools that were absolute no-nos, and it was Penn State and then that team up north.
Yeah.
I would even maybe throw Michigan State in there as a I mean, I wouldn't be worried.
No,
but I'm looking at Jim Knowles and I'm going, I know that you had ties to PSU. I know in his interview he talked about, or his introduction, he grew up a Penn State fan. That's great. Fine. But you were a Buckeye. That rivalry is second to Michigan. And to me, to leave there for a job that I would say is equal now, because in my opinion, Penn State's going to come in the favorites to win the title.
I think it's going to be interesting to see. It leads to interesting questions about not so much the Chip Kelly departure, but I think the Jim Knowles departure leads to questions about the inner coaching dynamics, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that there was talk about, well, he didn't get along with this coach, or, he had some squabbles with this or whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's with Ryan Day. It's just, it's that behind the scenes stuff that is just going to lead to a lot of speculation. At the end of the day, he's gone. So the OC's gone, the DC's gone. Those are new faces. Michigan just saw what that can look like when you've got to kind of rebuild a bit, because on top of that, you also are going to lose a lot of talent on both sides of the football. On
the defensive end, to be
in particular, yeah. One of the things that you don't lose, and this is what helps distinguish it from what Michigan just went through, is you do retain your head coach. Mm-hmm. And that helps tremendously. I don't think Michigan has quite the, and this isn't a knock at Sharon, but I don't think that Michigan has maybe quite the they still won 8 games, but quite the fall off, okay, from 15-0 to 8-5 if Harbaugh stays there. Now, if Harbaugh stays there, Piaf also keeps a bunch of those pieces, okay?
Yeah.
But I think retaining the head coach, retaining the kind of commander of this whole thing is a huge piece of getting new guys and pulling that all together that Michigan didn't have. So that's where I don't know that it's going to be exactly the same where, well, Ohio State's looking at a 4-loss season. I don't think that's the case, but you will find out pretty quickly. Is Matt Patricia a good hire or not? Is having Hartline back in an OC role, in a co-offensive coordinator role, which he's been in before and it didn't go super well. What does that look like? And then I think the big question that I'm going to ask as a Michigan man is Ohio State just extended Ryan Day. Mm-hmm. And in one sense, it makes perfect sense to do it at this timing. You just won a national title. In another sense, it's weird timing because a month prior to that, the AD had to go on public radio and try and keep the city from burning down. So Ohio State's at a very interesting spot right now, I think.
Yeah, and I think expectations need to be chill. This isn't me trying to be like, they're going to be bad, so just prep. Because I don't believe that in my heart of hearts. I really don't.
But we genuinely don't know
but
what this team's going to be.
And I think that's why I'm saying to have some caution, because this Ohio State team will still be a very good Ohio State team. I have no doubts about that. But this defense was chock full of seniors.
Yep.
It's going to be completely brand new from almost top down. You're going to have a handful of familiar faces.
And Patricia's probably running a different defensive scheme,
for sure. And so it's going to take a little bit of time. But they showed some young guys. You got Arvell Reese is coming there, Jermaine Matthews, who had some playing time, Kenyatta Jackson, who was a stud, Edric Houston, who played well. Like, there are some dudes on that defense that are still. Sonny Styles coming back, which is a huge pickup. You're going to have some guys on there that are going to play. The offense still has some playmakers. The biggest question mark is going to be quarterback position.
Yeah.
I don't even want to say the running back, because you got Donaldson, that I think a lot of people are forgetting, from West Virginia, who was a very good running back for West Virginia. So you've got playmakers, but these are new coaches. These are a lot of new faces, especially on the defensive end, or the defensive side of the ball. It's going to take a little bit of time, and you open the season with Texas.
Yeah.
So if they come out and they look a little flat, they maybe lose game one. Do not drop everything and call for coaching changes and whatever other drastic things.
Because again, with an expanded playoff, that game, unfortunately, and we won't go into all this, unfortunately, that game means a ton and doesn't mean that much, because these are both going to be top 5 teams.
It'll tell you a lot and it'll tell you a little.
Now, the only caveat to that is that if Texas comes out there and just absolutely puts a whooping on Ohio State at home, now there's concern already.
For sure.
That's unlike. Listen, I vote for it.
If they
I feel like that's unlikely to happen.
If they lose like 42-10 or something crazy, then.
But
maybe we'll like.
It's a very curious spot to be in, and this brings it full circle to where we started and what this whole podcast is about. It's a weird spot to be in for Ohio State in this rivalry. It's a weird spot for Ryan Day, because again, it's that weird thing of, he lost the game. He's now lost 4 in a row, but he's holding a trophy at the end of the year, and suddenly goes from the AD again having to go on sports radio and tell people we're not firing him, to suddenly signing him for an extension 6 weeks later. And folks are going to have to, if they haven't come around to it, they're going to have to get over it, because he's going to be the coach. Mm-hmm. But where it gets tricky is come November, once again.
Yeah.
The coach you just signed an extension to could now be looking at 0 for the last 5. That's a very real, I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying that's a very real possibility. And where does that leave this whole thing? And this is why this rivalry is the single greatest rivalry in all of sports. There is no case in which, again, I'll use the Duke North Carolina thing again, right? There's no case in which Bill Belichick loses to Duke, but wins a national title, then wins a national title, and everyone's still like, yeah, but we lost to Duke.
Yeah.
No one cares.
Alabama, Auburn's not even like that.
Auburn, Alabama is close, but it's not there.
It's not the
same thing. You can literally be nearly fired, win a national title and get an extension, and still be staring down the barrel come November, because you still can't find a way to get done if we get to that point. Nothing like the rivalry. Thank you for subscribing. We'll have more episodes this offseason. Join our friend Patrick King. Be sure to support the podcast at rivalpod.com, at rivalpod across social media, and subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast right now.
The Rivalry is a production of River Radio Ministries. Want live updates from the show? Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at RivalPod. To learn how to support the show, shop our merch, and read our blogs, visit rivalpod.com. Make sure to follow us wherever you're listening now. And if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend so they can listen too.